Hey, movie lovers and citizens of Earth, welcome to Extra Entertainment Extra. Terry Hart has toddled off back to TMN, but joining me in the studio, I'm really pleased to have the author of How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs in Folklore, Film, and Fiction. Her name is Liisa Ladouceur, and she is, you are the queen of goth in Toronto. Is this what, I mean, if you go online and plug your name in, that's what comes up. How do you feel about that?
I have heard this rumor that I am a queen, that I am a queen of goth. I am a creature of the night, that is for sure.
Well, the book is fantastic. It's from ECW Press, and it's available at fine and not so fine bookstores everywhere, and I'm sure all over online and all that kind of stuff. Check it out. Tell me a little bit about what prompted you to write this book. Vampires, you can't turn on a television without seeing them. You can't go to the movies without seeing glistening vampires walking around in the daylight, which doesn't seem right to me. But what was it that prompted you to write this book?
Well, it is both a curse and a blessing that vampires are so ubiquitous in popular culture, because there are many books about vampires. I know I have them on my shelf. There are encyclopedias and coffee table art books, academic studies, and everything in between. And I love vampires, and I knew I wanted to write something about them. I wanted to find something that was, if not unique, at least really interesting to me, that I thought I could contribute something that hadn't been done before. And as much as I love vampire movies, the thing that has always interested me the most was the origins of the vampire myth in folklore. So I set out very specifically to examine the vampire destruction myth. Because as I say in the book, every culture that has a legend about blood-sucking revenants has means to destroy them. Nobody says, vampires, cool, come on in, here's my daughter. You know, they all have lots of different ways in which we get rid of these monsters. They go back to superstition and mythology hundreds of years in Eastern Europe. And I wanted to figure out why we stake them, why we behead them, what's the deal with sunlight, what about silver, where does this stuff come from? Because I've always been interested in death and funeral rites and things like that. So it was really where those two things intersect. And that's when I started the book, and I said, what about this idea? And ECW Press said, let's do it.
Well, the book starts with old myths, the origins of the vampire, and works its way up. So there's sections on folklore, there's a section on film, starting, with Todd Browning's films or film, I guess, Vampire in London, Nosferatu is in there, all that. But let's talk about the folklore, because I found that stuff fascinating. In the book, there are very few instances in folklore of the vampire as the sort of creature of the night as we know them these days. There's no capes. There's no romantic association with them. They are people who frequently were the victims of a plague. They were victims of bad luck. They were victims of whatever it might be, who then later on, after their passing, if something else strange happened in the village, they'd say, well, it must be that guy. And they would dig them up and they would stake them, behead them, put their head between their legs, all those things. So tell me a little bit about sort of the origins of what we today call a vampire.
Well, I think you've got it quite right.
I just answered your question for you. About that.
And, through figuring out why we kill them the way we kill them, we figure out where they begin. And It really is in the superstitions of small communities that are plagued by mysterious death and bad luck, and not understanding why that is happening. Today, we know if a bunch of people die in a short period of time, it might be TB, it might be a contagion. They didn't understand that. And so, like a bit of a witch hunt, they would blame some strange person in the community who had recently passed. The idea being that a bad death would cause more bad death. And the only way to stop this problem in the community was to possibly destroy this alleged vampire. So they would dig up a grave, they would examine the body, and if they saw evidence of, quote, vampirism, unquote, they would stake this body, they would cut the head off, they would burn the body, and this would put an end to the death and sort of misery in the community. The vampire was never caught in the act the way he is in film. We never saw him doing anything. It was always a dead body in a grave that was destroyed. And it was always someone we knew. It wasn't a mysterious stranger from Transylvania. Right. This was someone known to us as being bizarre.
Yeah, the weird guy that lived on the outskirts of the village who only came to town once a month to get supplies. That sort of thing.
And then there's all these other things. The seventh son of a seventh son.
Right.
A redhead. someone who was born with a caul still attached to their head as a newborn. There were all of these, lists of suspicious vampires.
Well, it's interesting. Once they would dig up someone, they'd say, oh, well, his hair kept growing. Oh, his fingernails were growing. There's blood. There's fresh blood in the mouth, all of which are easily medically explained away. Today they are. But in those days, it seemed to be, clear. What clear, and I'm using clear, I guess, with quotation marks, what all those things signified.
Exactly. Like they would open the grave and they would see a body that was bloated, and they would say, fresh blood. No, actually gas.
Yeah.
And they would stake the body and they would say, it groaned. No, that was gas. So, it's a way of understanding the mysteries of the universe, these superstitions. And it's the case with all monsters and all fables. They serve that purpose for us in the community. They made people feel better about the problem, that they could do something, they could solve it.
Well, what does this say sort of in a larger sense about the communities in which these sort of things were happening? Sociologically, I think it must point towards something. People wanted answers, they couldn't get them, so they would try and create an answer to make themselves feel better about whatever might be happening in their lives or in their communities.
That's exactly right. And that's what monsters do in general and have continued to do up until today. They help us understand our societal anxieties and the mysteries of the universe, specifically mysteries of death. And vampires still do that today, just in a different way.
Now, we move on through to film. We've just got about a minute and a half left in this segment. This is sort of, my thing, vampires on film.
You're kidding.
London After Midnight, a fantastic example, I think, of early vampirism seen on screen. But in the book, we say it's the first vampire movie. Lon Chaney played a vampire. Nosferatu sort of is probably a little bit more well-known.
Well, I think those are the first features. It's my understanding that vampire stories have been told by filmmakers since the very earliest days of cinema, just like the devil. We've always seen these sort of demons and creatures in really, really early incarnations of filmmaking. London After Midnight is not widely seen because it is a lost film.
Yeah, there's
age.
photos, and it's been reconstructed. There's DVDs that you can find. There's sort of, we'll reconstruct little bits and pieces of it using photographs that still exist, but you won't be able to see the whole film anywhere.
So its influence on vampire storytelling is minimal. It's primarily of interest to historians who want to know that was the first film. It was really 1922's Nosferatu, the silent film, that changed a lot.
And when we come back, we're going to talk about that film. This is a movie that even if you haven't seen it, you have for sure seen still images from it. You probably had nightmares when you were a kid if you were like me and read Famous Monsters of Filmland or The Monster Times or any of those things and saw photographs of it, because even after a century, this is still a terrifying looking film. When we come back on Extra Entertainment Extra, Liisa Ladouceur talks more about her book, How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs and Folklore, Film and Fiction. Stay with us.
It's Extra Entertainment from Entertainment Extra with Richard Crouse on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
Hey, movie lovers and citizens of Earth. Welcome back to Extra Entertainment Extra. In studio, my guest is Liisa Ladouceur. She is the author of How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs and Folklore, Film and Fiction from ECW Press. And it is on bookshelves right now as we speak. And online, of course, you can have a look at for it there. It's a fascinating book about the origins of, I think, something that we all think that we know a great deal about. I've seen Dracula. I've seen Twilight. I know everything there is to know about vampires. Well, you don't, and you'll find that when you read this book. Let's talk a little bit about Nosferatu, which was the movie that really, I think, established the idea of the vampire on screen. And I was saying just before the break, this movie terrified me when I was a kid. I used to read Famous Monsters of Filmland and The Monster Times and all those things. And just the still photographs of Max Schreck from this film with his ghostly makeup on is the stuff that nightmares are made of.
If you go to a costume shop for Halloween and ask for a vampire makeup kit, you will probably see an image that looks like the 1922 Nosferatu.
Yeah.
That is, in many ways, still the image. Not the Bela Lugosi aristocrat, but the monster. Yeah. The long nails, the teeth are more like rat-like than bat-like, and the big sort of like Spock-like ears and the bald head. It is terrifying. It is monstrous. And, it wasn't someone that you would take to the prom, that particular vampire. What's interesting, though, is that its influence on culture really doesn't begin until much after its release. It came out in 1922. Mm-hmm. It was first. It was also considered copyright infringement on Dracula. Right. And so the author of Dracula, Bram Stoker, his widow, went after the German filmmakers of Nosferatu and basically had that taken off the screen. And it didn't really come back till about the 1970s.
Yeah, it was one of those things that I remember you could see in late night, Midnight Madness kind of things. I think like a lot of films that came back, it played in front of a lot of people who were quite high at the time.
No doubt. But what Nosferatu did that is the most important thing for my book is it established the idea that sunlight would kill a vampire.
Right. Yeah. Because now we all think that if you look to the source of a lot of the myths, we all think it's Dracula, the book Dracula, and it's not.
It's not. Yes, vampires were always nocturnal creatures. Mm-hmm. They were generally doing their business in the dark. Yeah. But sunlight didn't kill them. They may weaken them, but it wasn't something that would immediately turn them to dusk. That was an invention of the Nosferatu film.
And what else? What else is the legacy of that film? Because, again, it was little seen for 50 years, but I think it had an outsized influence on the movies that came after it.
Well, it's considered a classic of German expressionist cinema for people who are interested in studying that.
So that means lots of shadows and unusual angles.
And so the aesthetic of it is incredibly gothic. It is not nearly as cheesy as the 1930s Dracula is when you watch it today. But it took a lot from the Dracula story. So we got to give Bram Stoker credit for both Dracula and Nosferatu, really. But it was this idea that the monster could be just eliminated by sunlight, which we now see all over the place.
When we come back in just a couple of minutes, we'll continue our conversation with Liisa Ladouceur on How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs, and Folklore, Film and Fiction. It's available in bookstores right now. I want to talk about the movie Dracula and take issue just a little bit with the idea that it's a cheesy horror film from the 1930s. When we come back on Extra, Entertainment Extra. Stay with us.
You're listening to Entertainment Extra. Now more with movie critic Richard Crouse on In Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
Van Helsing, now that you have learned what you have learned, it would be well for you to return to your own country.
I prefer to remain and protect those whom you would destroy.
You are too late. My blood now flows through her veins. She will live through the centuries to come, as I have lived.
We know how to save Miss Mina's soul, if not her life. I will find your earth box and drive that stake through your heart.
Hey, movie lovers and citizens of Earth. Welcome back to Extra Entertainment Extra. I'm Richard Crouse. Joining me in the studio, Liisa Ladouceur. She is the author of How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs, and Folklore, Film and Fiction, available in fine and not-so-fine bookstores everywhere. Congratulations on the book. We were talking about Dracula, which is a movie that is near and dear to my heart for many reasons, but you referred to it in the last segment as the cheesy 1930s version of it. And
that doesn't mean I don't love it. I also love Blackula.
Exactly. Blackula, William Marshall, it is cheesy, but there's something about it, though. I can only imagine that in the 1930s, the idea of what scared people was a little different than it is today. And yeah, Bela Lugosi's performance with the bugged out eyes and that kind of thing, which was at the time seen as kind of sexual, now looks a little ridiculous. But I still think that the movie works overall.
It is a highly sexual film, and it tapped into people's concerns at that time that strange men from afar were after your daughter.
Well, and Bela Lugosi became an enormous star. Now, it didn't work out well for him in terms of having an ongoing career after that. I mean, he worked in the horror genre for a long time afterwards, but, with diminishing results. But at the time that movie came out, he became, I guess you would say today, an unlikely sex symbol.
Yeah, I mean, for goth girls, he still is.
Yeah.
He was buried in his Dracula cape. That's awesome.
Yeah. So a good chunk of the movie, of the book, as would be suggested by the title, How to Kill a Vampire, is about methodology on how to kill a vampire. We've got about 3 minutes left. I want to talk about some of these. What would be your recommended way if you think you have a vampire living next door? What's your recommended way of getting rid of them?
Well, identify 6 ways in the book: staking, decapitation, fire, sunlight, silver, and love. Staking is your go-to. It's the easiest. Just grab anything you've got around. A pencil could do.
Right.
But if you want to be really, really sure, you got to go for the cremation, fire. Just burn them. However, I do say in the book that my own theory of the best way to kill a vampire is with love.
The book is called How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs in Folklore, Film, and Fiction. The author is Liisa Ladouceur, who joins me now. Explain How to Kill a Vampire with Love.
Well, I think the killing a vampire is an act of mercy, because as much as we like to romanticize the idea of immortality, who wants to see everything they've ever loved and cared for die and disappear over and over and over again for hundreds, if not thousands of years? So I think if we love vampires, we should kill them. And if, as we've seen in Twilight and other contemporary vampire stories, when a vampire sort of gets romantic feelings for a human, things don't go so well for them.
Well, True Blood, I mean, I think is an example of that. As someone who has made a study of this, as someone who, says things like, well, goth girls still love Bela Lugosi, do things like Twilight and True Blood, are they part of the canon, or are they sort of pop culture confections that don't really appeal to you that much?
Horror fans hate them, but they have contributed things. They have contributed their own twists on the mythology, which will live on. And if the best thing Twilight ever did was inspire people to go and make hard horror vampire films like 30 Days of Night, I think that's pretty good. But to me, it's not my thing, but it doesn't take away from the horror that I love. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's like someone asked Raymond Chandler one time, what do you think about these Hollywood movies that are ruining all your books? He says, my books aren't ruined. They're still on the bookshelf. They're fine up there. And so, I guess Twilight and all that doesn't take away from.
No, it's a gateway drug. Some young people will fall in love with vampires and go on to be horror nerds, and some of them will just go read more paranormal romance, and there's room for everyone.
Liisa Ladouceur, thank you so much. The book is called How to Kill a Vampire, Fangs in Folklore, Film, and Fiction, available, as I've said, in fine and not-so-fine bookstores everywhere. Thanks a lot. Is there one parting bit of advice you could give to someone in regards to killing a vampire? One last thing.
They can, and they must be destroyed.
Thanks so much.